Emma Turner had always been the kind of woman who chased the horizon. At 27, with her long chestnut hair tied back and hiking boots laced tight, she spent every free weekend on the rugged trails of the Colorado Rockies. For her, nature wasn't just scenery, it was her refuge, her therapy, her reminder that life was wide and full of possibility. Friends often joked that Emma didn't have a living room because she was rarely home long enough to use it. But one winter evening, fate decided to write a different chapter, one she never could have imagined. That night, she had been driving back from a late shift at the small-town bookstore where she worked. Snow dusted the ground, the air crisp with December's bite. She hummed along to the radio, thinking about the hike she had planned for the weekend. Then, in the blink of an eye, headlights swerved into her lane. A drunk driver barreled down the wrong side of the road, and before Emma could react, metal screamed against metal. The crash tore through her car, spinning it into a ditch, glass exploding around her like frozen rain. Everything went black. When Emma woke in the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic burned her nose. Her body felt heavy, wrapped in wires and tubes. She blinked against the harsh white lights, only to see her parents standing at her bedside, their eyes red with grief. It was her mother who finally whispered the words that shattered her world. The doctors had saved her life, but they couldn't save her legs. Both had been amputated above the knee. The news fell on Emma like a boulder, crushing her spirit in a way she had never known possible. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. Physical therapy sessions taught her how to maneuver a wheelchair, but each movement felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Nights were the worst, lying awake, staring at the ceiling. She could almost feel her legs, phantom sensations that mocked her reality. Friends visited with flowers and well wishes, but Emma's smiles were practiced, thin masks to cover the storm inside. She didn't want sympathy, she wanted her life back, the hikes, the runs, the simple joy of standing to make coffee in the morning. Her small apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Simple tasks became monumental challenges. Cooking dinner required balancing plates on her lap. Taking a shower meant swallowing her pride as she clung to metal bars for stability. Even rolling to her balcony to feel the mountain air stung with the reminder that she could no longer climb the peaks she had once conquered so effortlessly. Each day, she told herself to be strong, but inside she was unraveling. Grief had settled into her bones, heavier than any weight she had ever carried on the trails. Emma's friends tried their best to bring light into her life. They organized game nights, sent her motivational quotes, and reminded her of the things she could still do. But every attempt seemed to widen the gap between their reality and hers. They still had the freedom to run, to dance, to walk through the snow without thought. Emma couldn't stop staring at their legs, the casual ease with which they moved, and feeling a sharp ache of envy twist inside her. She hated the bitterness growing in her heart, but it was there, gnawing at her relentlessly. On some mornings, she would drag herself to the full-length mirror in her bedroom. Sitting in her wheelchair, she would stare at the reflection of her altered body, the bandages and the empty space where her legs had once been. She didn't recognize herself anymore. The confident, adventurous young woman who once sprinted through trails with laughter in her eyes had vanished. In her place was a stranger who felt small, incomplete, and lost. She wanted to believe life could go on, that she could rebuild, but in those quiet moments, hope felt impossibly far away. Her parents visited often, bringing groceries, cooking meals, and doing their best to remind her she was loved. Yet Emma could see the sorrow in their eyes. Each time they looked at her, a reflection of the daughter they feared they'd never truly get back. She tried to reassure them with forced jokes and brave smiles, but inside she was crumbling. She didn't want to be their burden, didn't want her story to be defined by pity, but every reminder of her condition, every glance of sympathy, every sigh of concern only deepened her isolation. Winter dragged on, and Emma sank further into despair. Snow blanketed the mountains she once called home, but now she could only watch from her window as hikers passed by, their backpacks strapped tight, their laughter carried on the wind. She longed for the crunch of boots on snow, the rush of adrenaline on a steep incline, the breathtaking view from a summit. Instead, she sat in silence, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair, her spirit restless but her body betraying her. Life had not only changed, it had been stolen. By March, Emma had learned to navigate her town in her wheelchair, rolling down sidewalks and maneuvering through doors with practiced motions. Outwardly, she seemed to be adjusting. She even returned to work part-time at the bookstore, greeting customers with polite smiles. But inside, she felt like a ghost of herself, going through motions without truly living. Customers spoke to her kindly, but she caught the flicker of pity in their eyes. It cut deep every time. She didn't want to be admired for surviving. She wanted to be seen as whole again. At night, Emma would sit by her window, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, gazing at the starlit mountains. She whispered silent questions into the dark. Why her? Why now? Why this cruel twist of fate? She thought about the future she had once envisioned, long hikes with friends, dancing at her wedding, chasing her children across grassy fields someday. Those dreams seemed to vanish with the crash, buried in the snow beside the twisted wreck of her car. What was left felt like a half-life, a cruel reminder of what she would never again have. Yet deep inside, a flicker of defiance still lived. It was faint, buried beneath layers of grief and anger, but it existed. Emma had always been strong-willed. She had faced storms on the mountains, pushed through blisters and exhaustion, and reached summits when others had quit. Somewhere within her, that spirit remained fragile, waiting, but not gone. She didn't know how or when, but part of her longed for a reason to believe again, a chance to reclaim something of the life she had lost. For now, though, she remained in the shadows of her grief. The morning air outside the small cafe was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and fresh pastries. Emma had wheeled herself there, hoping for a moment of normalcy, a easy chance to sip her latte and watch life go by. But as she tried to maneuver through the uneven pavement toward the cafe door, one of her wheels caught on a crack, jerking her chair abruptly. Her coffee nearly spilled from her lap as frustration bubbled up. That was when a calm voice behind her said, "Need a hand?" She turned, expecting pity, but instead met steady, kind eyes. The man was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair at his temples and a posture that spoke of discipline. He didn't look at her chair the way others did. He looked at her. "I'm Daniel," he said, gently freeing her wheel from the crack. She thanked him, awkwardly waiting for the inevitable sympathetic words, but they never came. Instead, Daniel simply asked, "How's the coffee here? Worth a try?" For the first time in months, Emma laughed softly. His tone wasn't heavy with sorrow, it was light, ordinary, like she was just another person. They sat outside together, Daniel sipping black coffee, while Emma tried to shake off her guardedness. He shared bits about himself, how he had served in the military, how an injury overseas had ended his service, and how he had found new purpose in crafting prosthetics for fellow veterans. Emma listened, her curiosity growing. When he asked about her, she hesitated, the old pain pressing down, but his calm presence drew her out. She told him about the accident, her lost hikes, her battles with grief. Daniel didn't flinch or try to fix her feelings. He just listened. That conversation lingered in Emma's mind long after she rolled away from the cafe. Unlike others, Daniel hadn't tried to tell her how strong she was or how everything happens for a reason. He had simply been there, fully present, and it mattered more than she realized. A few days later, there was a knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, holding a worn leather notebook and a quiet determination in his eyes. "I've been working on something," he said, "and I think it might help you." Emma blinked, unsure of what to expect. Inside her living room, Daniel laid the notebook on the coffee table, flipping through sketches and diagrams. They weren't ordinary designs they were for. Prosthetic legs, streamlined and adaptive, built with flexibility for hiking and walking. "These started as projects for soldiers I worked with," he explained, "but I think we can make something that fits you." Emma's throat tightened. She had dreamed of standing again, even walking, but part of her had buried that hope, afraid of disappointment. "Why me?" she whispered. Daniel's answer was simple. "Because you deserve to live again, not just survive." Over the next week, Daniel returned again and again. He brought measuring tools, molds, and pieces of carbon fiber. Emma sat patiently as he worked, though nerves coiled in her stomach. The idea of prosthetics both thrilled and terrified her. What if she failed? What if she fell? Yet Daniel's steady hands and patient voice calmed her fears. "This isn't about perfection," he told her one evening as he adjusted the frame. "It's about progress. Every step you take is a victory." His words carried a weight of experience, the kind of wisdom forged through battles Emma could only imagine. The day of her first fitting was filled with trembling anticipation. Daniel helped her position the prosthetics, guiding her with gentle instructions. Emma's heart pounded as she gripped the parallel bars in his workshop, her body unsteady. For a moment, fear nearly overtook her, fear of falling, of failing, of proving that she wasn't strong enough. But Daniel's calm voice cut through the storm. "One breath at a time. Trust yourself." Slowly, shakily, Emma shifted her weight, feeling the unfamiliar pressure beneath her. Her legs, artificial yet real in their promise, held. Tears welled in her eyes. Her first step was small, hesitant, like learning to walk all over again. The prosthetics felt foreign, her muscles weak, but the sensation of rising, of no longer being confined to the chair, was overwhelming. A sob escaped her lips as she clung to the bars, but Daniel's quiet smile grounded her. He didn't cheer loudly or overwhelm her with praise. He simply said, "You did it." That simple acknowledgement struck her deeper than any grand gesture. She had done it. She had stood. She had moved forward. And for the first time since the accident, hope felt tangible. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became more than just a craftsman. He became a steady presence in Emma's journey. Each day he refined the prosthetics, adjusting the fit, smoothing the edges, ensuring her comfort. With every session, Emma grew stronger. She practiced balance, took wobbly steps, and slowly learned to trust. Her new legs. There were setbacks, falls that left her bruised, moments of frustration that brought tears, but Daniel never let her linger in failure. "Falling isn't the end," he told her after one stumble. "It's proof you're moving forward." His patience became her anchor. Emma began to notice subtle changes in herself. Her posture straightened, her voice carried more confidence, and laughter returned to her days. She no longer dreaded the mirror. Instead, she began to see a fighter staring back at her. On afternoons, she and Daniel would sit outside the workshop, sharing stories over coffee. She learned about his struggles, his scars, the nights when he too had felt broken. Their shared resilience wove a bond between them, one built not on pity, but on mutual strength. Emma realized she wasn't alone in her battle. Someone else understood the climb. Then came the day Emma dared to dream bigger. "Do you think I'll ever hike again?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Daniel looked at her with the steady conviction she had come to trust. "Yes," he said simply. "It won't be easy, but the mountains haven't gone anywhere." "Emma, they're waiting for you." Those words lodged deep in her heart, rekindling the flame she thought had died. For the first time since the accident, she could imagine herself back on the trails, feeling the wind at her face, not as a memory, but as a possibility. Her progress became the talk of the small town. Neighbors who once pitied her now watched in awe as Emma walked slowly down Main Street, her steps unsteady but proud. Children waved, and elderly couples clapped softly. Emma blushed at the attention, but inside she felt a strength blooming. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was alive, moving, proving to herself that life could be rebuilt. Each time she looked at Daniel, standing quietly in the background, with that small, knowing smile, she felt gratitude swell within her. He hadn't just given her prosthetics, he had given her back her future. One evening, after a long practice session, Emma sat on the edge of Daniel's workbench, sweat on her brow but joy in her heart. "I can't believe this," she whispered, glancing down at her new legs. "A few months ago, I thought my life was over." Daniel handed her a bottle of water and said, "Life doesn't end because it changes. It ends when we stop fighting for it." She held his gaze, seeing in him not just a craftsman, but a survivor, a teacher, and perhaps the very stranger fate had sent to rewrite her story. The summer sun shone brightly over the town square, where, in colorful stalls lined the sidewalks and music filled the air. The community fair had always been one of Emma's favorite events growing up, but she hadn't dared to attend since the accident. This year was different. With Daniel by her side, steady and reassuring, Emma walked across the stage as the crowd erupted into cheers. Each step echoed like thunder in her heart. Children clapped, neighbors smiled, and tears glistened in the eyes of strangers who had witnessed her journey from despair to this radiant moment of triumph. Emma paused in the center of the stage, her prosthetics glinting faintly in the sun. The applause washed over her, but instead of shrinking under the attention, she lifted her chin proudly. For months she had lived in the shadows, hiding her scars, but now she stood as living proof that brokenness could be remade into strength. Her eyes blurred with tears, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. In that instant, she realized her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every person who had ever felt defeated, yet still dared to rise again. After the fair, townsfolk approached her, some with hugs, others with quiet words of encouragement. A young girl tugged at her sleeve, her wide eyes full of wonder. "You're like a superhero," she whispered. Emma knelt carefully to meet her gaze, emotion tightening her throat. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just someone who got a second chance." The child smiled and skipped away, but her words lingered. Emma had never imagined she could inspire others. That realization struck her deeply. Maybe her pain hadn't been meaningless. Maybe her journey could light the way for others stumbling in the dark. Later that evening, Emma and Daniel sat on a park bench, the fair's lanterns glowing around them. Music and laughter carried through the warm air. Emma leaned back, her heart full. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that fate takes things from us only to give us something else in return?" Daniel's expression softened. "Every day," he replied. "Life broke me once too, but it also gave me purpose. Maybe that's what it's about, not what we lose, but what we do with what's left." Emma nodded, tears threatening again. His words felt like truth carved into her soul. The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings. Emma no longer limited herself to practice sessions in the workshop. She walked to the cafe alone, browsed the local bookstore, and even joined a small fitness group that welcomed her warmly. Each day her confidence grew, and so did her vision for the future. One evening, she turned to Daniel with an idea. What if we could do this for others? Not just me, not just soldiers, but children, adults, anyone who can't afford. And prosthetics! Daniel paused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Together, they began sketching out plans for a foundation. They spent long nights at Daniel's workbench, drafting names, calculating costs, and imagining possibilities. Emma suggested they call it Steps of Hope, a name that reflected not only physical strides, but also the emotional courage it took to keep moving forward. With Daniel's technical expertise and Emma's newfound passion, they began reaching out to local businesses and charities. To their amazement, support poured in. People who had watched Emma's transformation wanted to be part of it, donating money, supplies, and time. What had started as a dream was becoming real. The first patient they helped was a boy named Jacob, only 9 years old, who had lost a leg in a farm accident. His family couldn't afford the expensive medical prosthetics, and he had been confined to crutches for nearly a year. When Jacob tried on his new leg, crafted by Daniel and adjusted carefully with Emma's encouragement, the boy's smile lit up the entire workshop. He wobbled at first, then took a few brave steps toward his mother, who wept openly. Emma knelt beside him, tears streaming down her own face. "See," she whispered, "you're stronger than you think." Stories like Jacob's multiplied quickly. Word spread beyond the small Colorado town, and soon families traveled from neighboring states to meet Daniel and Emma. The workshop buzzed with life, laughter, tears, determination. Emma became the heart of the foundation, meeting each person with compassion, sharing her own story of loss and recovery. She knew the exact fears they carried, the silent doubts that whispered they weren't enough. But she also knew the joy of defying those doubts, and she carried that hope into every conversation. What she once thought was her ending had become a beginning for countless others. For Daniel, watching Emma blossom into this new role filled him with quiet pride. He had always seen her strength, even when she hadn't. Now, the world saw it too. One night, after a long day of fittings, he found her sitting outside the workshop, staring at the stars. "Tired?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "Exhausted, but in the best way." He sat beside her, silence stretching between them in a comfortable rhythm. After a while, she said softly, "You didn't just give me legs, Daniel. You gave me back myself." His throat tightened, but he only nodded, humbled. Months passed, and the foundation grew beyond anything they had expected. News stations covered their story, donors reached out from across the country, and volunteers signed up in droves. Emma often stood before crowds, sharing her journey with honesty and courage, her words moving people to tears. She spoke not of tragedy, but of resilience, of the power of kindness to rebuild lives. Each time she stood at the podium, walking confidently on the legs Daniel had crafted, she felt a swell of gratitude. Fate had taken much from her, but it had also given her something priceless: purpose. Despite the success, Emma never forgot the small, quiet moments that had carried her this far. The first time she stood, the first step she took, the first time Daniel told her she was more than her loss. These memories anchored her, reminding her that her foundation wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the people who walked into the workshop broken and walked out whole. One afternoon, as she watched a little girl take her first steps with bright pink prosthetics, Emma felt her chest ache with joy. This was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. The following spring, Emma decided to return to the rocky trails. With Daniel by her side, she set foot on the winding path she once thought she'd never see again. The climb was difficult, her legs straining with each step, but the rhythm of mountains welcomed her back. Birds sang, wind rustled through the pines, and sunlight danced across the peaks. When they reached a lookout point, Emma stopped, tears streaking her cheeks as she gazed across the horizon. "I'm home," she whispered. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said quietly. "You've come full circle." At that moment, Emma realized her journey wasn't defined by the accident, nor by the years of grief that followed. It was defined by what she chose to do afterward, to rise, to fight, to give. The mountains she loved had always stood tall, waiting for her. Return, just as life had waited for her to claim it again. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Emma knew she had not only regained her strength, but had also built something greater, a future filled with meaning, hope, and endless beginnings. Her story became more than survival. It became a testament to the power of kindness of one stranger who had chosen to listen, to help, to believe in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Emma and Daniel's foundation flourished, changing lives across the country, proving that the hardest losses could lead to the brightest paths. And every time Emma took a step, whether on stage, in the workshop, or on the mountain trails, she carried the truth within her, that even broken pieces, when mended with love and courage, could create something stronger and more beautiful than before.